This video is kindly sponsored by Magic Spoon. Horror has always been one of our favorite genres here at Screened. We enjoy watching films that explore our fears and anxieties in a compelling manner. If they manage to stick around in your head after you're done watching them, then they've done their job. Of course, not everyone enjoys scary movies, or at least what one might perceive a horror movie to be. It doesn't always have to be gore, monsters, demons, or chainsaw-wielding psychopaths. There's a richness of everyday horrors that might be able to terrify us. As a child, my interest in horror began innocently with wanting to know more about cryptids, monster legends, mythology. Then that interest was furthered with the Goosebumps books, then Stephen King. It was the allure of these stories that could introduce you to dark places behind the thin safety of a narrative. I remember that Scream was a film series that really eased my brother and me into scary movies. The comedic aspect made it more appealing for a couple of 90s kids who grew up in a very religious environment and were told to be wary of horror movies. Looking back at our own origins with the genre, we wanted to learn more about how horror in film has evolved into what we know today, to see what was done effectively early on, and what we can learn from the past, by revisiting the most influential movies of the genre throughout the different decades. We were debating what would be the best starting point. We could go all the way to the beginning, the infancy of the silent film era, or dig in deeper into German Expressionism around the 1910s to 1930s, or look at the classic Universal horror movies that brought Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and the Mummy to the mainstream. But we decided to settle on the 1960s, specifically from a Western perspective, since the subject would be way too vast. Now, why the 60s? In regards to cinema, it's over half a century into the history of film. People have grown up with the possibility of watching silent films in talkies. By then, movies had become more accessible due to television as well, so most people had a very basic cinematic literacy. They weren't surprised by cuts or POV changes anymore. Culturally, it's after the Second World War, right in the middle of the Cold War. There's the fear of communism, nuclear war, and the push for social progress. Traditions coming face to face with new realities. There were also restrictions as to what could and could not be shown on screen with the Hays Production Code. Profanity wasn't allowed, neither was suggestive nudity, graphic or realistic violence, and sexuality. Filmmakers had to be very creative in the way that they dealt with taboo subject matter, or complex characters that didn't fit the ideals that were being sold by the moral code and its religious backers. By the end, the code was harder to enforce and was replaced by the MPAA rating system. Competition with television as a means of entertainment was also a factor in its demise. Films had to go beyond what was seen on the small screen. The unique context of the 60s served as a creative breeding ground for young and older filmmakers that would expand the genre and influence others further down the line. What was supposed to follow was 6 movies that we believe were very influential to the horror genre and that you should be aware of. But we were a bit strapped for time this week, so this video will only introduce 2 of the 6 movies, and next week we'll have part 2 ready for you. Before we continue, let's segue to today's sponsor, Magic Spoon. So since the beginning of the year, I've been trying to be more careful with what I eat, and I've been trying to increase my protein intake, especially during breakfast. And actually, I've been eyeing Magic Spoon for a while because they offer a healthy breakfast alternative. They have all kinds of flavors you can try out, like fruity, cookies and cream, maple waffle, but the one I enjoyed the most had the right mix of cereal I would have enjoyed as a child and benefits I look for as an adult. It was a frosted flavor. It has a sweet, vanilla, and slightly marshmallowy taste. Magic Spoon has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving. Only 140 calories per serving. They're also keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb. Click the link below to grab a variety pack and try it today. And be sure to use the promo code SCREENED at checkout to get $5 off any order. Or go to magicspoon.com/screened. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund you your money, no questions asked. So click the link below and use the code SCREENED for $5 off. Or go to magicspoon.com/screened to save $5 today. And now back to the show. In literature, Gothic horror is said to be one of the oldest forms of horror. The story is set in a haunted mansion, or castle, deals with death, and is meant to elicit terror. So it stands to reason to begin with one of the most celebrated haunted house stories ever written, Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Before watching Mike Flanagan's loose adaptation of Jackson's novel, my first interaction with anything based on her writings was the '99 remake of The Haunting. Even back then, I remember feeling the movie was uninspired. The only thing that stayed with me was the scene when the piano string breaks and cuts a woman near the eye. I didn't watch the original until much later, and when I did, I was pleasantly surprised at how the movie can get under your skin without being extravagant.
Hill House had stood for 90 years and might stand for 90 more. And whatever walked there, walked alone.
Hill House is a manor that's seen its fair share of bloodshed since it was built. A researcher assembles a team of assistants to help him find evidence of the supernatural. Once they arrive and begin their stay, the house starts to exert its influence on them. The film is a bit more of a departure from classic gothic horror like The Innocents, bringing us into a more modern world, and focuses on the threat posed by the house as a diseased and haunted entity, instead of that of an apparition. The usage of wide angles and the oddly placed doors and furniture add to the sense of disorientation that the characters feel, especially Nell. The scares are very subtle, almost to the point where we might even think that it's all in Nell's head. It's a ghost story where we don't see any ghosts, but we do feel their influence and the growing dread within the atmosphere. It feels like a precursor to the likes of The Shining, where the Overlook Hotel is a character in of itself, driving the caretaker deeper into madness. According to Martin Scorsese, The Haunting is one of the scariest films of all time. The second movie that we're going to look at brings the mysterious threat closer to home, and not in a faraway manner, Village of the Damned. This is a film that feels like a feature-length classic Twilight Zone episode, but with a bigger budget. One day, the people of Midwich fall prey to an invisible force, and all living beings within a certain radius fall unconscious for a few hours. Later on, it's discovered that all Midwich women and girls of birthing age are pregnant. All of the children born of this mysterious event are eerily similar to each other. They age rapidly, they are very smart, and they exhibit powers that frighten those around them.
You wish we wouldn't come here anymore, Mrs. Plumpton?
I never said.
It's what you're thinking.
The film uses the go-to sci-fi villain, the extraterrestrial, as a threat, but focuses on the human response. It doesn't delve too deeply into the aliens' origins or plans. Science fiction's usage of aliens as an external force to be afraid of somewhat replaced that of the supernatural external force, along with nuclear power. They were tropes that had become increasingly popular in the 50s and 60s, sometimes to a story's detriment, and in retrospect, they can really date a movie. I think it was beneficial for the film not to show a UFO, as in the novel, and only imply that aliens were behind everything. It keeps the story more grounded. Even if the children respond to threats in an extreme and violent manner, one has to remember that they act in order to protect themselves. They may have powers, but they're still kids that were born to women from the village. It blurs the lines of what might otherwise just be an us versus them situation. It makes the implications of the villagers' attempts at murdering the children all the more disturbing. Thank you for taking the time to watch our video on the most influential horror movies of the 60s, Part 1. Our next video will pick up where we left off with the remaining 4 movies. Make sure to stay notified for that one. Until next time.